Hello students, welcome back. In this video from the lesson Thinkers, Beliefs and Buildings, we will explore sculpture and understand how art reflects religious ideas and cultural practices. We will then look at new religious traditions and how beliefs evolved over time. Finally, we will discuss grappling with the unfamiliar and examine the sources historians use to reconstruct the ancient past. So in this video, we will be learning about units 9, 10 and 11. Let us begin. Sculpture, that is unit 9. Removal and value of sculptures. Sculptures from stupas were taken to Europe. People valued them for beauty and historical importance. Many wanted to keep them as possessions. Stories in stone. Sculptures often depicted stories like visual storytelling scrolls. For example, sculptures at Sanchi showing rural huts and trees. Historians identified it as a scene from Vasantara Jataka. That is, a story says, generous prince gives away everything and lives in forest. Historians interpret sculptures by comparing them with text. The next is symbol of worship. Early sculptures avoided showing the Buddha in human form, used symbols instead. Empty seats indicate meditation, stupa indicate Mahaparinibbana, that is final passing away, wheel, that is first sermon. Symbols represent events, not literal objects. Historians must study traditions to interpret them. Popular traditions in sculpture. Animal sculptures reflect non-Buddhist beliefs. Example, women touching tree identified as Shalabanjika. So what does this mean? What were their belief? Her touch makes trees flower. Considered auspicious. That means it was a good sign. Shows blending of Buddhist and earlier traditions. Animal and goddess motif. That is the next one that we are going to study under sculpture. First, let us understand the meaning of motif. Motif, a repeated design, pattern or theme used in art or sculpture. Now, let us get into the explanation of this topic. Animals carved for storytelling and symbolism. Sculptures at Sanchi show many animals such as elephants, horses, monkeys and cattle. These animals made scenes lively and attractive for viewers. Some came from Jataka stories, that is, stories of Buddha's previous birth. Animals were also used to represent human qualities. Let's see. For example, elephants. It represents strength and wisdom, associated with power, intelligence, and royal dignity. Next one is horses. That indicates movement, energy, and travel, often linked with progress or actively in narrative scenes. The next one is monkeys. Represent playfulness, activity, and liveliness. It helps to create natural everyday scenes. The next one is cattle. Indicate rural life, prosperity, and livelihood. Show agricultural background and wealth in traditional society. Now let's look into the women with elephants pouring water. Sculpture shows a woman standing among lotuses with elephants sprinkling water on her. This act is like Abhisheka. That means secret consecration. Some historians identify her as Maya, that is mother of Buddha. Others identify her as Gajalakshmi, meaning goddesses of prosperity and good fortune. It is possible devotees saw her as both, showing blending of beliefs. Serpent motif on pillars. Serpent, that means snake. Images appear frequently in sculptures. These come from popular folk traditions, not always recorded in text. show influence of local belief on Buddhist art. Now, interpretation by early historian James Ferguson. Who is he? He studied sculpture without access to translated Buddhist text. And what did he conclude? He concluded Sanchi was a center of tree and serpent worship. His interpretation was incomplete because of his limited knowledge at that time. Moving on to the next unit, New Religious Traditions, under which we are going to study 10.1, Development of Mahayana Buddhism. You will understand what is Mahayana Buddhism when I explain the last point, Mahayana. Before that, let's understand what is changes in Buddhist ideas. Development of Mahayana Buddhism. Changes in Buddhist ideas. By 1st century CE, Buddhist beliefs and practices began to change. Early teachings stressed self-effort, that is personal effort to achieve Nibbana. Nibbana, we have already seen the meaning. For those who missed, it means liberation from cycle of birth and death. The Gautama Buddha was seen as a human teacher who attained enlightenment through his own efforts. Emergence of the idea of a savior. Gradually, people began believing Buddha could ensure salvation. This shifted focus from only self-effort to seeking help from a divine figure. Concept of Bodhisattva. Bodhisattva meaning compassionate beings, very kind beings. They gained merit. They chose not to enter Nibbana. They stayed to help others attain liberation. The next one that we are going to talk about, image worship. Worship of images or statues of Buddha and Bodhisattvas became common. Religion became more devotional and accessible. Mahayana. We have come to the topic now. This new approach called Mahayana. Now hope you understand after explaining everything what is Mahayana. That is, all of these approaches that we have studied so far, it is called Mahayana. It means great vehicle. That is, path open to many people. Followers called older tradition Hinayana. That means lesser vehicle. Now let's move on to the next topic, 10.2, Growth of Puranic Hinduism. Similar savior ideas. Hindu traditions also developed ideas of divine protection and salvation. Two major traditions existed. Even today it exists. One is Vaishnavism, another one is Shaivism. When I say Vaishnavism, that means worship of Vishnu, and Shaivism, we call it as worship of Shiva. Now, Bhakti. What is Bhakti? Devotion. That is emphasis on Bhakti, loving devotion to a chosen God. Relationship seen as bond of love between devotee and deity. Avatars of Vishnu. What do you mean by avatars? Incarnation. What is incarnation? God appearing in another form. Or Vishnu believed to take forms to save world from evil and restore order. 10 avatars recognized, different regions favored different forms, helped to unite local belief into one tradition. Symbolic representations, deities showed through sculptures and symbols. Shiva represented by linga, weapon and ornaments is the symbolic meanings. To understand sculptures, historians refers to Puranas. Nature of the Purana, compiled by Brahmanas, written in simple Sanskrit verse. It was read aloud to women and Shudras who lacked access to Vedic learning. Contained stories circulating among traveling people. Example, spread of Vasudeva Krishna worship from the Mathura region. So that is growth of Puranic Hinduism. Let's move on to 10.3, building temples. Beginning of temple construction. When stupas like those at Sanchi were developing, temples were also emerging. Structure of early temples. Now let's see how the early temple structure looked like. It had small square room called Garbhagriha, meaning Om chamber. That is, we call that as an inner sanctum. One doorway for worship, and later additions were shikara, that means tall tower over shrine, and sculptured walls. Now let's see the temple features that many features were add-on, and we call this as later temple features. What were the add-on features? Assembly halls, huge gateways, water arrangements, larger complex designs. Rock cut temples. Some temples carved from rock. Tradition began in 3rd century BCE under Ashoka for Ajvika renouncers. Reached peak with temple at Kailashanatha temple in Ellora. Chief sculpture reportedly amazed at its completion. Now let's move on to the last unit for this lesson. Can we see everything? Understanding visual tradition. Let's understand with this explanation about what they say for this. Can we see everything? The past had rich visual traditions, architecture, sculptures, painting. Many works were destroyed or lost over time. The remaining monuments show the vision of artists, masons, and architects. However, we may not fully understand their meaning today. Images meant different things to people 2000 years ago. Moving on to 11.1, grappling with the unfamiliar. What do you mean by the word grappling? It is trying hard to understand or deal with something which is very difficult or confusing. Reaction of 19th century European scholars. When European scholars first saw Indian sculptures, they found them confusing or shocking, especially figures with many arms or heads, human-animal combination. They called them grotesque, that is, strange or ugly in appearance. Comparing with Greek art, scholars try to understand Indian art by comparing it with ancient Greece sculptures that is familiar to them. They considered Indian art inferior to Greek art. Discovery of Buddha images. They were excited to find images influenced by Greek style found in northwestern cities Taxila, Peshawar, because these regions once ruled by Indo-Greeks. These sculptures were judged as the best Indian art by them. Now, what is the lesson that they learned from this approach? Scholars used familiar yardsticks, that means standards, to interpret unfamiliar things. This is common human strategy, understanding new things through known ideas. Now let's move on to 11.2. If text and image do not match. Using text to interpret art. Art historians. Okay, who are these art historians? People who study art of the past. They use written sources to understand sculptures. These written sources include stories, epics, and religious texts. This method helps explain what the sculpture might represent. It is considered better than comparing with foreign art because it uses Indian cultural context. It relates directly to local traditions and beliefs. However, this method is not perfect. Sometimes text and sculptures do not match clearly, so the meaning may still be uncertain. For example, sculpture at Mahabalipuram. There is a famous large rock sculpture here. Where is this Mahabalipuram? First of all, let us understand where is this located. It is located in Tamil Nadu. It shows a dramatic scene with many figures. Historians do not agree on its exact meaning, so they interpret it in different ways. Let's say their interpretation. First is the descent of the Ganga. Based on stories from Puranas and epics, interpretation says sculpture shows river Ganga coming down to earth. How they explain it? There is a natural rock cleft. Cleft, what do you mean by the word cleft? Deep, narrow, split in the rock. This cleft is seen as the path of the river descending. Okay, this rock gap symbolizes the flowing water. So that was the interpretation one. The next interpretation too is Arjuna's penance. Based on the epic Mahabharata, a central figure is seen doing penance. What do you mean by the word penance? Deep meditation. Historians identify this figure as Arjuna. They believe Arjuna is praying to obtain divine weapons. So the sculpture may show this event instead. So, what is the conclusion from the example? Even when texts are loose, the meaning of art may still be uncertain. Different historians may give different interpretation. Therefore, one artwork can have multiple meanings. We must study it carefully and keep an open mind. So, this brings us to the end of this lesson. I have provided important 8 mark board-based questions, and I request all of you to revise the lesson through this video and practice the questions given. We will meet again in the next video as we move on to the next lesson through the eyes of travelers. Thank you.